And it starts even earlier than that. It's understanding the goals and the challenges that are going on in these buyer personas' professional lives that are a leading indicator that at some point in the next couple of days, next couple of weeks, next couple of months, they're going to be a perfect prospect, a perfect candidate for potentially becoming your next biggest fans and your next happiest clients on the planet, singing your praises from the rooftops. So that's how I would approach how a colocation data center can educate clients. Lean into the self-driven buyer's journey, understand whether this customer education program, this client education program, is truly meant for post-purchase like client education, or whether you're also going to create a version that is for prospects, what kinds of companies they're from, and who are the key stakeholders, what do they want to learn most. So that's how I would approach how a colocation data center can educate its clients. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live show, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem, from data center operators like hyperscalers, colocation providers, edge, modular, wholesale data center providers, as well as technology and facilities related companies in and around data centers, digital infrastructure and critical facilities, plus construction, real estate, and investment firms all over the data center ecosystem, as well as outsourced sales and marketing companies that work with data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. And regardless of where you sit on a GTM, on a go-to-market team, perhaps you work in sales or marketing or account management, sometimes known as customer success, product management, channel partnerships, or maybe you're the executive leader, the executive sponsor of the full go-to-market team, responsible for making sure that you get the right people sitting in the right seats, rowing at the right speed, playing at the right tempo, making all of this magical growth happen in this amazing period of opportunity that we have within data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities right now. If this is the first time that you're joining us for the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. We're thrilled to have you with us. Let us know in the comments what you do in the data center industry and where you are joining us from. So what's on the agenda for this week? First up, we're going to look at how a colocation data center can educate its clients. Then we'll turn our attention to how a data center power, cooling, and infrastructure provider can build a marketing platform. Next, we'll get into how an IT infrastructure and cloud solutions provider gets its clients to migrate. After that, we'll take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor. And in the second half of this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, we'll talk about how a data center energy management provider creates awareness within data center facilities, how a data center network infrastructure sales specialist can learn and upskill. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, we'll talk about how a data center power management and monitoring provider can generate insights to help its sales teams. If you have an idea for a challenge, a question, a topic that you think we should address in an upcoming show, please leave that in the comments on whatever platform that you're watching from. And if you want to make sure that you stay up to date on new educational events and resources available from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, make sure that you subscribe to our email newsletter directly on our website, so it can come directly to your email inbox on Sundays at www.dcsmi.com. Right at the top of the page, you'll see the button to subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter. So let's jump into this week's first question, which is, how can a colocation data center educate its clients? How does a colocation data center educate its clients? That is a fantastic question. And I think we need to start by clarifying whether we're talking about educating clients in the more general sense that you're talking about both future clients, also sometimes known as prospects or leads, as well as existing clients that are currently signed on that are leasing space in your co-location facility, signed on, subscribed, whatever you want to call it. So are we talking about existing clients, or are we talking about future clients? Because it makes a big difference. Why does it make a big difference to understand the life cycle stage that someone's at with your company? Because different people are going to have different kinds of needs and questions. A future client early on will have different goals and different challenges that they're currently working on that are a leading indicator that at some point in the coming days, weeks, or months, they're going to be a great sales opportunity for your company to need space in your co-location, one or more of your co-location data center facilities. A existing client may have completely different kinds of goals and challenges that they're working on now that they've resolved some of the initial ones and they're signed up for your service. And in most cases, your goal at that point, it becomes an account management issue, a client success issue, sometimes known as customer marketing, where you're trying to have a fantastic onboarding experience, great initial value, intended value, extended value. So they're getting all of the best use out of your existing resources, your existing infrastructure, all the things that all the goals and challenges that they originally came to you for, as well as some additional ones that you know that someone in that kind of job function, in that kind of company, would also benefit from as well, but they may not even be aware that these additional services exist from your company. So first up, I want to segment on that question. We want to figure out, for a co-location data center that wants to educate its clients, are we talking about educating future clients, or are we talking about educating existing clients? If it's future clients, this is something that your marketing and sales team should be working on together. You know, your marketers, your sales development reps, your account executives. If they are existing clients, this is an education related goal, challenge, campaign, whatever you want to call it, that your customer success folks, your account managers should be working on to help your existing clients get more value from working with your company. Once we know that, the next part of that is we want to figure out who that ideal client profile is. What do those companies have in common? So for future clients, we can likely find this by looking at your website, looking at your case studies, looking at your logos, looking at your CRM, your customer relationship management system. And we want to figure out, of your clients that love working with your company, that have been with you for years, that give you fantastic reviews, where you carry an exceptional net promoter score, very profitable clients that your team truly enjoys working with. What do those clients have in common? For starters, when it comes to defining your ideal client profile, for defining your whole education process, where are they located? This is a big one. Why is this a big one? Because if you're doing education, you have to decide whether you want that education to be on demand, meaning that they can consume it whenever they want, like an on-demand video series or on-demand course or something like that. Or is this education going to be live? Is it going to be delivered on a webinar or live stream or some other kind of experience where time zones matter? So for starters, when it comes to your ideal client profile, figure out geographically where these clients are located, because if you're going to do live events, by the way, I mentioned virtual like webinars or live streams, but you could also do in-person events. If you have a classroom in one of your facilities, or you have a conference room or something like that, you could be inviting in groups of whatever the room is capacity wise. If the room comfortably sits 20, great. Then that's the upper ceiling on what you can do with education with existing clients or future clients. So yeah, there's a couple of different formats, a couple of different modalities that you could use to educate your co-location clients. But we first need to know where they're located, because their location will dictate like scheduling preferences, when they're most likely to attend. If you sell globally, there may also be some language issues that come into play when it comes to looking at the geographic location of your clients. For example, if you're located in the US and most of your educational content is in English, but you have a lot of clients in Latin America or throughout Europe or throughout Asia, well, you may need to create educational content in more than just English. So let's get consensus on this education campaign, on this education program, first by understanding where they're located, because it has implications for watching on demand, attending live, or even what language you'd potentially create these educational resources in. Second, we need to know company size. what's the minimum size that a company really needs to be at to be able to afford your minimums? And what's the maximum size that a company would be where they kind of outgrow your existing capabilities? If you're a global data center colocation provider and you have thousands of employees or perhaps even hundreds of employees, there may not be an upper limit on where clients outgrow your company. But if you're a smaller colocation operator, a few dozen, maybe even if the low end of the range of a few hundred, there may be an upper limit at which a company gets so large that their financial requirements, their legal requirements, their compliance requirements, whatever it is, coverage requirements, may not be a good fit for where you are today as a company. So let's define in your ideal client profile what's the minimum size in terms of number of employees or headcount that they need to be able to achieve your minimum purchase, your minimum level of engagement, pass your underwriting, whatever you want to call it. And what's the upper end of the range where it just may not be a great fit for what you can deliver today? So we talked about geography, we talked about company size. Let's also look at industries. Why do industries matter? Because depending on where you're located and where they're located, there's unique compliance requirements, certification requirements, accreditation requirements that pop up that can be unique to all different kinds of companies in a specific geographic area, or companies that are within certain kinds of highly regulated industries. Like, for example, if a company is located in healthcare or financial services or government or education or something like that. So depending on where you're located in the intersection of their particular industry, there may be some attributes, some resources, some competitive advantages that you have that you can deliver on. And there may be other cases where you just can't. So in terms of like what's qualified versus non-qualified and how you plan this educational content program, let's take into account the industries where you've been most successful and the industries where you've not. If we're talking about targeting or lead generation, for sure these would be inclusions or exclusions from things like an outbound campaign or an ad campaign, drop-down lists on forms, website navigation, website homepage coverage, but we're talking really about educational content. So from an educational content perspective, as we start to bring in examples and use cases, we certainly would want to know what industries are the intended audience for this kind of educational content and which are not the intended audience, because that will for sure impact how you build your curriculum and what you're trying to achieve with this educational content initiative. So we've mapped out at a company level why geography matters, why company size matters, why industries matter. Company size too, don't overlook that the bigger the company it is, the more varied the roles are of stakeholders and the more potential stakeholders you may want to try to loop into these educational content initiatives. Like, for example, if you're selling to small to mid-size or the low end of mid-market, you're going to find, in most cases, relatively small IT departments. If you're selling to enterprise clients, you could find massive IT departments that have hundreds, if not thousands of people in IT roles, and there's specific roles within like infrastructure or cybersecurity or operations or something like that that are a better fit than others. Which kind of brings us to the other part of defining your education program. As we've talked about at a company level, let's also talk about at an individual level. Who are the people within these companies that are most likely to get value from attending one of your educational events or consuming one of your educational resources? The most important intended person that we're creating this educational program for, we're going to call the primary buyer persona. The primary buyer persona is the most important economic stakeholder that has a role in that particular company. The second most important kind of stakeholder, we're going to call your secondary buyer persona. That's going to be the second most important kind of economic stakeholder. And when it comes to educational content, many times there's a certain kind of content that's relevant to a decision maker. And then there's different kinds of educational content that are relevant to the goals and challenges of a secondary stakeholder or a tertiary stakeholder that's either also on a decision committee or just happens to be an end user of your company's colocation. So not only do we need to know at a company level who we're creating this content for, but we need to know the individual kinds of people that we're creating this content for. And when you may discover is that you may need 2 or 3 different tracks, 2 or 3 different versions of these educational content resources to appeal, for example, to a CTO, as opposed to someone who's a network engineer or a cybersecurity professional or something like that. And again, it depends a ton on the level of resources. If this is your first foray into creating educational kind of content, you're going to make your best effort at creating one size fits most, where you try to find the consensus on what everyone needs to know. And within that 30-minute, 60-minute, 1 hour, 4 hour, whatever program you're creating, you'll try to make sure that 80% of it is relevant to everyone, and that perhaps have some sidebars, have some specific content interspersed from within that's especially relevant to like a chief technology officer, chief information security, cybersecurity kind of person, an operations person, an engineering person, a compliance person, what infrastructure person, whatever it is. So depending on your resources, just like anything that you do with marketing or sales or account management, if you can segment and you can personalize, so much the better. If you don't have the resources and you're trying to make a best effort at having a great program that covers like what 80% of the people are going to get value from, then yeah, that's still a great place to start. But we need to understand the buyer personas, who they are, their biggest goals and challenges, because that's going to dictate a lot of what you choose to do at the intersection of customer education and what they're working on individually, as a team, as a company, and what they're struggling most individually, as a team, and as a company, especially how it intersects with your core products and services and getting the most value from your company's products and services. Because at the end of the day, you need a learning objective. More than likely, you're going to want to have some knowledge tools. At the minimum, you'll probably give out slides, but you probably would have a workbook. You might have some workbook exercises. You may have some multiple choice questions, some polls, maybe even have a certification exam at the end of your client education. But again, there's two big cuts with all of this. First, are we talking about client education or prospect education? And then within those broader categories, who are we really producing it for? What kind of company are they from? Are they most likely to be from geographically, company size, and one or more industries? And what kind of stakeholder are they? And the better job you can do of understanding who they are, what they care about the most, what's going on in their company, the better job you can do to tailor and customize that client education. But at the end of the day, what this really, really plays well within is this general trend of a client-driven journey, a self-driven buyer's journey. Like if we were having this conversation 10 years ago, you would have found that about half of a typical buyer's journey was over before a prospect was willing to meet with someone from your sales team. At the time, CEB, the corporate executive board that's now owned by Gartner, found that 56% of a typical journey was over before sales contact. That is now very much in the rearview mirror. Add 10 years of digital transformation, tens of millions of people working from home in the early 2020s, millions of people continuing to work from home, a lot of baby boomers retiring, a lot of Gen Z and millennials and more decision-making roles. And that 56% number has jumped all the way to 83%. And we see no sign of that letting up anytime soon. Again, Gartner found that 83% of a typical buyer's journey, researching, comparing options, and evaluating pricing, now happens before sales contact. So what that means is your traditional marketing and sales playbook that you've used for 5, 10, 20 years, and your team members that execute that playbook may be struggling a lot more than you realize to be able to get in early and often. Because what your clients, what your future clients, what your prospects are craving most is learning. So repositioning your sales development reps, your account executives, your marketers to show up now more as teachers, as consultants, as subject matter experts, as trusted advisors, some even as thought leaders, is an incredibly important unlock to getting back in early and often with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context. So you and your client-facing team members are seen as the be-all, end-all expert when it comes to education for companies that are using data center colocation. If you don't take this approach, if you manage to get found at all in that last 17% of the buyer's journey, you're setting yourself up to be seen as a commodity provider, which means it's a race to the bottom with pricing. So it's incredibly important that you think about those typical 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision and figure out a client-facing way to show up early and often to educate and build trust. Educating and build trust is the unlock with all of this. And frankly, for many companies that are based on recurring revenue, a lot of account management problems and a lot of account management successes start by getting in early and often by being the ones that teach members of that decision committee, those key stakeholders, how they evaluate all of the different options that are in front of them when it comes to co-location in the middle of their buyer's journey before they're even ready for a sales conversation. And it starts even earlier than that. It's understanding the goals and the challenges that are going on in these buyer personas' professional lives that are a leading indicator that at some point in the next couple of days, next couple of weeks, next couple of months, they're going to be a perfect prospect, a perfect candidate for potentially becoming your next biggest fans and your next happiest clients on the planet, singing your praises from the rooftops. So that's how I would approach how a colocation data center can educate clients. Lean into the self-driven buyer's journey. Understand whether this customer education program, this client education program, is truly meant for post-purchase, like client education, or whether you're also going to create a version that is for prospects, what kinds of companies they're from, and who are the key stakeholders, what do they want to learn most. So that's how I would approach how a colocation data center can educate its clients. Okay, what do we got up next? By the way, if you're getting good value from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you hit the like button to help spread the love. And if you have an idea for a challenge, a topic, a question that you would like to see addressed in an upcoming show, please make sure to leave that in the comments wherever you're watching, and we'll consider adding that to the queue from one of our upcoming shows, one of our upcoming episodes. So next question up is, how does a data center power cooling and infrastructure provider build a marketing platform? How does a data center power cooling and infrastructure provider build a marketing platform? That is a fantastic question. And it's an especially fantastic question because I see so many companies struggling with figuring out what their marketing playbook should look like for today's modern buyer. And a lot of that is recognizing that the way that your prospects and clients are looking into different options, comparing different options, and ultimately making their purchase decisions is very, very different today than it was 5 or 10 years ago. And it's not just that AI, artificial intelligence, and high performance computing is pushing density to upper limits, which is creating massive challenges around power, cooling, and infrastructure. It's not just that all of those density requirements and AI related requirements are rendering a lot of traditional data center facilities obsolete. It's not just that they're creating grid capacity challenges and all kinds of pushback from local communities and having to justify exist. It's not just all of those. It's that coupled with all of that, your buyers now, for the most part, prefer to spend most of their journey, most of their research and decision-making process without your sales team being in the room, without your marketers being in the room. And this a lot of people should be thinking a lot more clearly about what your buyers actually want in these early and middle stages of the journey, because they really don't want your sales team, your account executives, your sales development reps to show up anymore and read them the information that's on your website. No one needs you to read slides to them anymore in a meeting. What they do need is they do need people that can help them solve their problems, help them achieve their biggest goals that they know that they have. Not the goals that you'd like them to have, but the goals that they know that they actually have expressed in their own words, and not the challenges, not the struggles that you wish they would have, but the struggles and the challenges and the stressors that they know that they actually have, that they've articulated in their own words. How do we get these own words? Because we do our homework, we do our research, and we don't just take buyer personas and put them down on paper based on talking to a couple of your peers, your coworkers internally within your own company. No, we go and we look at 5, 10, 20 representative people in each segment, and we either do face-to-face or video interviews, or we do surveys, or we look at their CRM interactions. We study a stack of their LinkedIn profiles and what shows up in search and social footprint, because we need to truly understand the consensus on that segment's biggest professional goals that they're trying to achieve individually, as a team, and as a company, and what they're struggling with the most, what's messing up their work-life balance, what's causing them to lose sleep, what's taking away from their ability to unplug and take true vacations, at the intersection of what their job responsibilities are and what you do as a data center power cooling and infrastructure provider. And the better job you do at understanding that context and empathetically delivering a ton of professional development value, the more you're going to be welcomed in. And that's the unlock with all of this, is the future account executive, the future AE should look a lot more like a Big Four consultant and a lot less like a traditional transaction-focused salesperson. Does this mean that you should go into your email signature and your LinkedIn profile and your business cards and come up with a better synonym than account executive? Perhaps. It's usually a much bigger challenge for a lot of companies than just that, because at the root of this is company culture. And if the company culture has you still continuing to execute your marketing platform like you got in the Back to the Future DeLorean and flipped on the flux capacitor and thinking that you're back in 10 or 20 years ago and nothing's changed, it can be like banging your head against the wall, burying your head in the sand. But if you're truly realistic for how your most important buyers are going through their process of deciding what they're going to do with their approach to power cooling and infrastructure, your client-facing team members who have expertise to deliver can and need to be inserting themselves into your ideal clients, into your prioritized buyer persona's professional development process. So they need to show up looking a lot more like teachers, consultants, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, perhaps even thought leaders when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center power, cooling, and infrastructure for specific kinds of job functions in a specific geographic area for companies of a certain size in certain kinds of industries. And when you realize how layering those 3 or 4 parameters in together, it becomes a lot more approachable than trying to boil the ocean. If you have the resources of a huge power and cooling company, if you work for, I don't know, like Vertiv, Schneider Electric, Legrand, someone like that, you more than likely can go all in on dozens of different segments in dozens of different geographic regions around the world. But if your company doesn't have thousands or tens of thousands of employees, and maybe it's just a few handfuls or a few dozen, it's a lot more important for you to pick your battles. It's a lot more important for you to be laser focused on that target account list. So again, when it comes to your marketing platform, start with the basics. Start with defining your ideal client profile, or going back and refining and updating it. Where are they located? Where are they located geographically? How big or how small are their companies in terms of number of employees? And what industries do they tend to be located within? All of these are basics that we should be able to infer from looking at the case study section or the logos on your website. For sure, we should be able to get some answers from spending some time in your CRM, your customer relationship management system. We want to see where your best clients, what they have in common. That's at a company level. That'll help you. Once you define that ideal client profile, you should be able to build out a target account list to power your ABM, your account-based marketing. It could be anywhere from a couple dozen, usually a few hundred, in some cases a few thousand potential target accounts that you think would be fantastic companies to buy your data center power cooling and infrastructure solutions in the coming weeks, months, and years. And in addition to that target account list, we need to define the most important stakeholders in those accounts, your primary and your secondary, maybe even your tertiary buyer personas, for who the individual people are that are going to care most about the educational resources, the educational content that you're going to deliver that's going to help to earn your way in to get a seat on their side of the table, so that your company and your client-facing team members are seen as the be-all, end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center power, cooling, and infrastructure for a specific kind of buyer persona in a specific geographic region for a company size of a certain kind of range and within certain kinds of industries. And the better job you can get in doing it, getting in early and often, so you have a role in as many of those 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision, the better your whole marketing playbook is going to work. Another thing that I just want to put out there is, a lot of times when it comes to people looking to build a marketing platform, I hear things like wanting to get to the decision maker. Getting to the decision maker is more than likely not a single decision maker anymore, Because even if you manage to get a meeting with the person that's ultimately going to sign off on this big power cooling and infrastructure project, everyone's gotten so ridiculously risk averse now that they're going to almost certainly kick this back to their team members and say, well, it sounds good, but have you met with Tom and the rest of the team? Have you met with Susan and the rest of the team? You haven't? Oh, okay. Well, you need to go back and make sure that there's consensus among them before we move forward. So you very quickly realize that there's no longer just a decision maker anymore. It's really a decision-making committee. That's where account-based marketing, that's where understanding the different kinds of stakeholders that are on that decision committee and having a segmented, personalized approach to addressing what each of those different kinds of stakeholders cares about when it comes to power cooling and infrastructure. That's what's going to win over the most important people. And you'll know this is working because when it comes to your webinar program, when it comes to your educational events, someone signs up and you send back an email message that says, oh, it's great that you signed up, but we know when it comes to power cooling and infrastructure, it takes a village. It's truly a multidisciplinary team approach. There's typically people involved from engineering, ESG, finance, compliance, IT, infrastructure, whatever it is. So you list the 4, 5, 6 different functions. So with that in mind, who else should attend this upcoming event? Who else should attend this upcoming webinar? And you'd be shocked how well that simple email marketing automation that you've been able to do for 10, 20 years now, how well it works to get multiple people from the same company, from that decision committee showing up. So you start to figure out pretty quickly who the different stakeholders are from those companies, and even more important, teams that learn together, grow together, and you're helping to drive alignment and drive consensus among the team members on how they're going to approach this big data center power cooling and infrastructure initiative. And your client-facing team members are the ones that are shaping the criteria. So that's getting to multiple decision committee members, multiple decision kind of stakeholders and other related stakeholders in that company. Another thing that's also really important when it comes to building a marketing platform for today's buyers, to recognize that the concept of branding has changed quite a bit over the last 10 years. It used to be that brand was something that your creative director owned. And that person had a PhD in Adobe Creative Suite. And just like IT professionals have this reputation of maintaining strict control over anything and everything having to do with IT, your creative director owned anything and everything having to do with your brand. And that aspect of branding is still important, but your branding today is so much more than that. Your brand is what the marketplace says about your company and your client-facing team members when they're not in the room. And given that they're not in the room for much of the research and decision-making process anymore, we know from Gartner that 83% of the journey is happening without you being in the room. It's incredibly important that we figure out a way to get you back in the room so you can influence how the marketplace, how the ecosystem, how data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities companies feel about your company. And the way to earn our way back in is we need to be seen as teachers, educators, consultants, trusted advisors, subject matter experts, and perhaps even thought leaders when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center cooling power and infrastructure. So branding today is about so much more than just your logos, your colors, your hexadecimal colors, your fonts. Branding is everything that the marketplace says about you. And the way to earn your way back in early and often is to figure out a way to insert yourself into the professional development programs, the professional development initiatives that your most important stakeholders are going through for how they learn about data center power, cooling, and infrastructure. So for a data center power, cooling, and infrastructure provider that wants to build a marketing platform, lean heavily into education, lean heavily into getting in early and often so that your client-facing team members are able to build relationships with multiple stakeholders, multiple people on these decision committees from these different kinds of companies, and figure out a cohesive program so they're motivated, so these leads and opportunities are motivated to want to spend time with members of your client-facing team as opposed to them having to chase and beg and cajole and manipulate to try to drive quote unquote sales meetings, whatever that actually means. Because when you're successful at educating and building trust with your prospects and future clients, not only are you indoctrinating them into seeing the world the way that you see it, it's very likely that not only do you stay on the short list, but in many cases, your educational events, your educational resources are so incredibly valuable that you're actually knocking your competitors off of the short list with every interaction that they spend with your company that they're not spending elsewhere. One, because you're starving the oxygen away from these other companies because they're spending so much time with you learning. There literally is no time left to spend time learning from others. Second, they're learning so much that there's no need to seek out other professional development opportunities. So you'll know this is working well, again, because you see multiple people from the same company that are consuming your educational resources and attending and participating in your educational events. But you'll also know this is working well because at the first traditional sales meeting, when they hit that 83% point, you go in there and they're literally quoting your methodology. They're quoting your ebooks. They're quoting what they learned at your breakfast seminars, at your lunch and learns, at your webinars, at your training programs, whatever you have done to be able to educate and build trust with those segments. And when you do that, the price sensitivity is gone. The level of professional respect, the level of positioning is just like off the charts. And you set up everything for success going forward. You proactively head off a lot of potential issues that can come up post-purchase because you've already proactively addressed all of them. And it's truly a beautiful thing. For many companies, this is going to necessitate a big change in your company culture, which is why a lot of these initiatives, a lot of these kinds of programs need to start all the way at the executive level. For a company with a few dozen or a few hundred employees, your CEO literally needs to be the executive sponsor on this kind of program, this kind of prioritization going forward. If you're from a much larger company, it's probably a division VP or chief commercial officer, chief revenue officer, or something like that. But it comes from a place of recognizing that, we're tired of people treating our team members like crap. We're tired of the condescension. We're tired of being talked down to. We're tired of having to chase them. We're tired of dealing in bad faith and the ghosting and everything. We have really smart people internally. It's time to let the industry know about that in a way that puts our flag in the ground and lets people know that we have the smartest experts on the planet when it comes to data center power, cooling, and infrastructure. So that's how it would approach how a data center power, cooling, and infrastructure provider can build a marketing platform. Okay, what do we got up next? What's the next question? How does an IT infrastructure and cloud solutions provider get its clients to migrate? How does an IT infrastructure and cloud solutions provider get its clients to migrate? Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And it gets at the heart of what are some of the biggest go-to-market challenges among data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. Some of the biggest challenges center around getting people to change the status quo. The technology part, the sustainability part, the energy management part, yeah, those are some pretty big challenges. But you know what's also a really big challenge? Getting people to change. Transformation. Digital transformation. And the concept's been around for a long time, 10 years or so or more. However, it hasn't gotten any easier because we have now so many different options competing for attention among your ideal clients. And they're used to getting things exactly on their own terms, exactly when they want it. I often tell people when it comes to trying to motivate change, if you've ever seen the iconic movie Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, or the sequel, there was a character in both of those movies and in the original book, Veruca Salt. And Veruca Salt was this spoiled girl, maybe it was about 10 or 12 years old, and she managed to convince her very wealthy father to corner the market on the golden tickets. Because if she got a golden ticket, then she could go on the tour and potentially have the chocolate factory be given to her. And one of the things that causes her demise in the original movie, in a similar kind of scenario in the second movie, is she sings a song that has this punchline of "Don't care how, I want it now." So part of the message from the author and the screenplay is that a lot of these kids ended up dooming themselves because they had incredibly selfish behaviors. I'm sure for people that are film critics and philosophers, there's probably a much deeper meaning with all of it. But you see this 10 or 12, you see these kids that are late elementary school, probably into middle school, in many cases lashing out and acting like toddlers, having these toddler type of temper tantrums. Don't care how, I want it now. And the reason I bring this up is your buyer personas, most of your ideal clients, most of your target accounts are now populated with people that have gotten very used to getting immediate gratification. They get immediate gratification because if you think about when you're planning a business trip, if you were planning a business trip 10 years ago and you needed to arrange transportation to the airport, or when you arrive at your destination from the airport to your hotel, and it was 20 years ago, how did you go about doing that? Took a lot of work, a lot of phone calls, perhaps some faxing back and forth. How do we go about arranging transportation to and from the airport today? There's an app, and within seconds, you're on your way. When we book flights 20 years ago compared to today, when we want to order anything and everything that would have required separate visits to multiple retail stores 10 or 20 years ago, how do we do that today? When we want to make restaurant reservations, we want to make an appointment to go to the salon, when we want to find a gym, when we want to find a new vendor for doing some work at our office or doing some work at our home. How do we navigate this today compared to how we did 10, 20 years ago? We know the mobile phone, the apps have become the remote control of our life, and it allows people to get incredible amounts of convenience. But when you're on the other side of this, when you are in a go-to-market role for an IT infrastructure or cloud solutions company, your prospects, your clients are expecting ridiculously immediate gratification. And because of that, they just don't see a lot of value in spending time with your sales team anymore until they're just about ready to buy. 10 years ago, it was very common that in the relatively early days of Web 2.0, where people still look things up on search engines and they still ask some questions on social media and they still watch webinars and watched YouTube videos and listened to podcasts, but it was nowhere near the adoption curve, the adoption levels that we see today. Today, we're now in this place where it used to be that your prospects and clients would spend half of that journey. At that point, it was 56% was over. So the final 44% was still spent with your sales team. Today, they're only spending the final 17% of the research and decision-making process with a member of your sales team. And that completely changes how you approach having to do behavior modification, how you approach digital transformation, how you approach getting your clients to migrate. Because what that means is we can't just show up as a vendor anymore. We need to show up as teachers, consultants, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, maybe even thought leaders when it comes to anything and everything having to do with IT infrastructure and cloud solutions for specific kinds of buyer personas in specific kinds of companies in a specific geographic region and perhaps even in specific industries. And the better job we can do with that, the more likely it is that we get them to know, like, and trust us in the formative stages of the buyer's journey and the awareness and the consideration stages, as opposed to just completely ignoring that and hoping for the best in the decision stage. Hoping for the best doesn't really work well anymore, because what that sets you up to become is a commodity provider, because you haven't had any differentiation whatsoever in those formative the early and middle parts of those 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. So it's not so much that you don't need SDRs or account executives anymore. In most cases, on commoditized products and services, there's a lot to be said for self-driven signups and self-onboarding for inexpensive small office, home office, consumerish kinds of infrastructure where there's just not enough in the unit economics anymore to afford inside sales, let alone field sales for that. Assuming you're still selling fairly large deals to mid-market and enterprise, there for sure will still be a role for early and middle sales involvement to stay with your prospects and clients throughout the journey. It's just getting increasingly more challenging to get your prospects and clients to want to spend significant amounts of time with you unless you can show up in a way that helps them to address their professional development goals, their professional development challenges, all of the things that are going on in their professional lives that they need to figure out that are important to their job description, their company's objectives and key results, their individual team's objectives and key results, and what they're finding most challenging, what's stressing them out the most, their biggest struggles that they're going through individually as a team as a company, and a better job you can do of having deep empathy and deep understanding, deep insight into what's going on with that, the better job you can do with creating these incredibly impactful educational experiences that allow you to get in early and often with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context. So they see your client-facing team members as the be-all end-all experts on IT infrastructure and cloud solutions. And they don't just see you as focused on a transaction. They don't just see you as focused on getting something on the deals board. They don't just see you as someone that's itching to get to President's Club again next year. They see you as someone who genuinely cares about helping those individuals and helping their coworkers across their team and other teams within the company achieve their business goals, achieve their IT related goals when it comes to anything and everything having to do with infrastructure and cloud solutions. So when it comes to motivating clients to migrate, it is a mindset shift. It's a cultural shift. It's figuring out a way for you to get invited in early and often. A second big part of that is when it comes to migration is using your happiest clients, your most successful clients as part of this educational initiative, as part of your educational events, as part of your content resources. The way you do this, it's probably not a big revelation, but interview-based content, case studies, podcast interviews, webinar panels, where you're showcasing, where you're highlighting how some of your happiest clients have navigated some of these transformations, how they've migrated some of these IT infrastructure and cloud-related migrations. So it starts with the traditional case study formula that's been around for decades. Meet Bob, meet Susan, meet Sally. They had this really big problem when they first came to us. They were struggling with it to no end, and it was causing all of these problems, all of these challenges within their company. They talked to us, and we helped diagnose some of what was going on in their company. And as a result, we recommended this particular solution. And since we've implemented this kind of solution, these are the tangible benefits that they've received. That's a traditional case study type of question. It's even more impactful when, in addition to reading about it, they can watch and listen to it. So you film the case study on video and you repurpose that into potentially audio and potentially into blogs and PDFs and short form content and long form content and all the other email and social posts and ad kind of content in between. But a very important part of this initiative to motivate change with these migrations, with these infrastructure and cloud services migration, is in addition to fantastic, highly relevant educational content, is we need to infuse some social proof in there as well, so they can see similar kinds of people from similar kinds of companies that have navigated this kind of journey, the steps they went through, and how much better individually as a team, as a company, they came out on the other side and how they benefited from all of this. So this is how I would approach how an IT infrastructure and cloud solutions provider can get their clients to migrate. We have three more exciting questions, three more exciting challenges that we'll be addressing in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. If you've been getting great value so far, make sure to hit the like button. We're going to take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor. When we come back, we're going to tackle three more big challenges.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
Hey, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and we're thrilled to have you joining us for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, where each week we tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem. If you have an idea for a topic, a challenge, a question that you would like to see us address in an upcoming show, in one of these upcoming episodes, be sure to leave that in the comments on wherever you are watching. So what's up next? The next question that we're going to tackle this week is, how does a data center energy management provider create awareness within data center facilities? How does a data center energy management provider create awareness within data center facilities? That is a fantastic question. So what we need to know first is, we're not necessarily trying to create awareness with data center facilities. We're trying to create awareness with the people that work in these facilities, and very specific kinds of people, the kinds of people that are going to be most interested in the kinds of products and services that we provide as a data center energy management provider. So the way we figure out who these people are is we look at historically where we've been most successful. So first we need to define our ideal client profile. In other words, where are the companies located? Where are they headquartered? Where do they tend to have branches? If they have branches, how big or how small are these companies in terms of their number of employees, their headcount, and any particular industries, verticals, niches where they tend to be located within. However, it's not just enough to know that these companies have data center facilities. They're probably either data center operators or data center end users with their own enterprise data centers. It's not just enough to know about the companies. We need to know about the people within those companies that are operating, that are managing these kinds of facilities, that are going to want to be most interested in what we have to say about our data center energy management products and services. So when we look at our case studies, when we look at our logos, when we look at our CRMs, we should be able to identify what category of stakeholder is typically the most important economic stakeholder in these kinds of initiatives. Who's the second most important kind of stakeholder in these kinds of projects and these kinds of initiatives? And if it's a big enough enterprise account, there may be a third category of stakeholder. We're going to call these buyer personas, and these buyer personas are based on actual research and some select educated speculation and understanding the consensus on what these folks' biggest goals are and what their biggest challenges when it comes to anything and everything having to do with energy management within data centers, digital infrastructure, within critical facilities. And it's not just a matter of guessing what these goals and challenges are. We need to actually know what they are and how each segment describes those goals and challenges in their own words. How do we figure out their own words? Well, we need to talk to them. We need to interview them face-to-face on video interviews. If we can't do that, we can run surveys. If we can't do that, at the absolute minimum, we can take a stack of LinkedIn profiles. We can look for the same people on Search Footprint and take the consensus on what we learn about them from search and social to figure out what their biggest goals and challenges are in their own words. Not what we want their words to be, but what their words actually are. Because that makes all the difference in the world, to being able to have an empathetic view, a client-focused view on what it's going to take to create awareness and educate and build trust with those folks. And once we do that, we can set about creating an educational content calendar. We can create an educational events calendar. We need to recognize that the game has completely changed from as recently as 5 or 10 years ago. For sure, AI, artificial intelligence, high performance computing is creating power density requirements that were unheard of as recently as 5 or 10 years ago. This, by nature, just in and of itself, is leading to grid power shortages. It's leading to a lot of pushback from external stakeholders, community activists, government regulators, utility companies themselves, elected officials. And in many cases, this is creating some massive energy management problems, but there are also big energy management opportunities. The key thing, however, is to recognize that in addition to how these technology changes and this macro environment has been altered quite a bit over the last 5 or 10 years because of recent advancements and needs around AI and the race towards artificial general intelligence and quantum computing and everything that's coming down the pike. But also at the same time this has been going on, your buyer personas, your ideal clients, your prospects now research and make their purchase decisions very differently than they did as recently as 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was quite common to find that your best prospects and clients would spend about half of their research and decision-making process on their own, about half of their buyer's journey, but they still would be open to meeting with someone from your sales team when they were just about past that halfway point. Add 10 years of digital transformation, tens of millions of people working from home at the start of the 2020s, a lot of baby boomers retiring, more Gen Z and millennials in decision-making roles. And we're now to the point that most of the buyer's journey now happens without your sales team being in the room. By most, what do I mean? 83%, Gartner found 83% of a typical buyer's journey, research comparing options, evaluating pricing, now happens before vendor contact, before sales contact. That means that even in the best case scenario, your sales team is only in there for the final 17% of research and comparing options decision-making. That's an enormous challenge. And it's one that, if we don't address, really puts your company behind the 8 ball. The way to earn your way back in early and often, so your client-facing team members have a significant role in a lot of those 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision, is it changes how we show up. We can no longer afford to just show up as account executives and sales development reps. We need to take those same client-facing professionals, and in some cases, they may need some reskilling, they may need some professional development, workforce redevelopment, whatever you want to call it, because they now need to show up and position themselves more as consultants, teachers, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, maybe even thought leaders when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center energy management. This changes the nature of who you hire. It changes the nature of how you reskill and upskill, cross-training, retraining. But make no mistake, the way back in when it comes to creating awareness among the right data center facilities professionals that care about energy management is we can't just show up as a vendor anymore who's trying to make a pitch, who's trying to get a deal on the deals board, who's trying to close a transaction. Because if we do, we're going to be completely ignored by nearly all of your most important stakeholders. The way that we earn our way back in is we get into education and trust building mode. We figure out a way to be a huge part of these stakeholders' professional development time. And when we do this correctly, when we invest in this with the right kind of mindset, we earn our way in early and often. We nearly guarantee that we get on the short list and stay on the short list throughout the full buyer's journey. When we do this exceptionally well, when they're spending so many educational resource touch points, when they're attending and participating in so many of our fantastic educational events, what starts to happen is competitive options start to drop off of that short list, meaning that by the time you get to the decision point with that particular account, with the multiple stakeholders who have all attended multiple events with you, you'll discover in many cases that your direct and indirect competitors are not on the short list anymore. There is no time left for them to even consider other competitive options because they've gotten so much value from their team learning with you. You've used these educational events experience to not only educate and build trust, you've used them to drive alignment across a team and across multiple teams within the same company who've attended and participated in your fantastic events. We know that teams that learn together grow together. We know that teams that are attending these kinds of events with you become indoctrinated into how you see the energy management space for data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. And we know when you do this exceptionally well, they get to the decision point. They're finally ready for a sales-related conversation. And they've become so steeped, they've been so ingrained in your methodologies, your learning and development, your professional development, and how you approach this, that they're literally quoting your webinars, your downloadable guides, your planning guide, your methodology, and how their team has evaluated this whole energy management initiative. And it becomes a beautiful thing. This gets you a buyer who understands that you have the smartest people on the planet when it comes to energy management for this kind of stakeholder, for this kind of company in this geographic region. And because of that, you end up with a buyer who's much less price sensitive. You have truly achieved differentiation and the awareness and the decisions, awareness and consideration stages of the buyer's journey, not just at the decision stage. And it sets not only for a much more efficient, accelerated sales process, but it sets the whole engagement, it sets the whole relationship up for success. Ultimately, when marketing and sales hands off that new client to your account managers, to your project managers, to your client success managers, because you've gotten everyone aligned and on the same page early and often throughout that full buyer's journey. So this is what it looks like to create awareness for fresh data center facilities related professionals that are interested in anything and everything having to do with energy management for data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure in today's self-driven buyer's journey. We need to show up early and often, not as vendors who are trying to pitch something, but as educators that are trying to infuse best practices on the pattern recognition that you've seen with other kind of stakeholders, similar kinds of stakeholders and similar kinds of companies in this region, and how they've navigated all these challenges. For most companies, these are going to be significant culture changes, which is why your internal champion for this kind of initiative needs to be pretty fairly well placed in the C-level of your company. And it comes from a place of recognizing that, we have some of the smartest people on the planet when it comes to data center energy management. And because of that, we're tired of our prospects and clients treating our team members like crap. We're tired of being talked down to. We're tired of the condescension. We're tired of being ghosted. We're tired of being jerked around. We're better than that. We have the smartest people on the planet in this space. We have the best insights. We have the best thought leadership. It's time we let the industry know that we are the definitive ones to go to when it comes to anything and everything having to do with energy management in the space. If you're from a company with a couple dozen or a few hundred employees, for sure your CEO needs to find the half hour a couple times a month to participate in these kinds of planning strategy, go-to-market realignments, reboots. If you're in a much larger company, it's probably a division director, a managing director, VP of that division, or maybe a chief commercial or chief revenue officer or chief marketing officer or someone like that. But this is how I would approach how a data center energy management provider can create awareness within data center facilities, is get in early, get in often, and be the ones that are leading all of the professional development. So you're educating and building trust as part of this awareness with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context, so that your most important buyer personas, your most important prospects and clients see your client-facing team members as some of the smartest people on the planet when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center energy management. Okay, what do we got? Next question up. By the way, if you're getting good value from this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, make sure that you help spread awareness, share love by hitting the like button on whatever platform you're watching. Okay, so next question up is, how does a data center network infrastructure sales specialist learn and upskill? Oh, this is a fantastic one about professional development for data center sales professionals. How does a data center network infrastructure sales specialist learn and upskill? That's a terrific question. And I see both among our clients, I see among the people that come to our events, I see among the people that I interview on the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, that this is a major challenge that a lot of companies are facing when it comes to staying relevant. And the reason that this is an especially big challenge is your prospects and clients that are going to be most interested in data center and network infrastructure are IT professionals. And IT professionals, by their very nature, tend to be quite skeptical, quite cynical, and very highly educated. And the same segment has historically not had very kind things to say about people that work in marketing and sales. So going back 10 or 20 years, in many cases, you've already been treading water. Add 10 years of digital transformation to all of this, with millions of boomers, baby boomers retiring, more Gen Z, more millennials in decision-making roles, the buyer's journey becoming more self-driven than it's ever been. And it's more important than ever for your sales professionals that work with prospects and clients for network infrastructure to be seen more as peers to their prospects and clients and less like traditional account executives and sales development reps. What does this mean? It changes the nature of how you hire. It changes the nature of your professional development. It's very common now among infrastructure as a service companies and data center operators to be hiring account executives who are so technical with their knowledge of IT infrastructure that not only do they have multiple vendor certifications that are similar to the kinds of certifications that at least entry level and intermediate level people would have in these IT roles within these end user companies. It's so common that when you hear about what they do nights and weekends with their home computer lab, it's so next level what they're learning on their own and investing and becoming experts in IT infrastructure that these sales professionals really could nights and weekends have a side gig, a side business as a fractional CTO for small and mid-sized companies. Let that sink in for a moment. So it's not just a matter that the account executive and the sales development rep of the future looks a lot more like a consultant, a teacher, a trusted advisor, a subject matter expert, is that their skills, their IT infrastructure skills have gotten to the point that they're at least a strong intermediate level, that they understand what's truly going on with IT infrastructure. They know so much that if they had the willingness and the ability, their expertise would allow them to take on a couple of clients here and there nights and weekends from small and medium-sized businesses that don't have a true CTO, that don't have a true IT executive in-house. And this is a business segment that I know very, very well. A big part of my career going back decades is advising managed service providers and IT consulting firms and integrators and value-added resellers who serve as essentially fractional CTOs, fractional outsourced IT teams for small and medium-sized businesses in their local area that are big enough to see IT as an important strategic necessity, but not so large that they could staff up a whole team internally, let alone have a true C-level IT executive on their payroll full time. So why is this so important that sales professionals and infrastructure have developed this level of expertise? Because this is what allows the sales professionals to be seen as peers with their prospects and clients. This is what allows them to have deep technical conversations with their prospects and clients about what their future plans are around network infrastructure. If you don't have that level of knowledge, if you don't have that level of expertise, you're going to continually be marginalized. You're going to continue to be shoved out of the way. You're going to be seen as a commodity broker, and you're not going to gain access to these really important early and middle stage conversations with the network infrastructure, the IT infrastructure professionals and engineers that you so badly need to build these relationships with. So in a lot of ways, the learning and upskilling is incredibly important. In terms of developing an individual roadmap for yourself and for your team members, what I would encourage you to do is, as you're going and you're building your go-to-market playbook, as you're building your go-to-market strategy, you're defining your ideal client profile and you're building buyer personas for the most important stakeholders in these companies that are going to have a big impact on who they choose to do business with for network infrastructure. As part of building out these buyer personas, doing the research and getting consensus on the goals and challenges, you're almost certainly going to get a list of job titles that this buyer persona tends to be in, the kinds of industries that they tend to work in, and the kinds of certifications that they have individually, the kind of conferences that they tend to attend, the kinds of media that they tend to read or listen to or watch. And when you get consensus on the certifications that this buyer persona tends to have, this should be a yellow highlighter moment for you, a yellow highlighter moment for you saying, oh, in this segment, I really very badly want to build deeper relationships with VPs of IT infrastructure and CTOs in these size companies in this region, in this industry. And you know what I've discovered? They all have these 3 certifications. I need to get these 3 certifications. How do I get these 3 certifications? Well, let me talk to my boss. Let me talk to the executives in our company. Is there a tuition reimbursement program? Is there self-paced training? Can I get some budget to be able to go and attend some of these workshops? Because it's incredibly important. If this is the prioritized segment for the future of not only my book of business, my team's book of business, our client list, what it's going to look like 6, 12, 18, 24 months down the road, if I can get up to speed, at least at a beginner and intermediate level with the kind of certification tracks that this individual has, all of a sudden I can have much better conversations with these prospects and clients. All of a sudden I can speak their language. I can have deep empathy, and I earn my way in early and often, not begging my way in, not cajoling or manipulating my way in as a vendor salesperson, but earning my way in as an expert, earning my way in as a consultant, as a teacher, as a trusted advisor who, as part of the sales process, is sharing unique insights on how other people in this similar job role and similar size companies in this region have approached dealing with network infrastructure. And I can have these much better conversations, not only because my company has these great educational resources and this insight and these buyer personas, but because I've also invested in my own professional development, my own learning, my own upskilling. So yeah, I keep hearing that repeatedly from executives, from CEOs, from presidents, from sales leaders within IT infrastructure companies, within managed services companies, within data center operators, is the incredible necessity of upskilling their sales professionals to be able to have these kinds of conversations. In most cases, supportive employers have some budget carved out from that. What I've heard loud and clear in most scenarios too, is you are expected to make these time investments for the most part after hours. In other words, it's not like they can have quota relief for a couple of weeks a year for you to be able to do this. No, this is something where the employer is meeting you halfway by providing financial budget, but they expect you to spend the time to go through these courses, these self-driven resources on your own time, because it's dramatically increasing your ability to be way more effective throughout the sales process, throughout a consultative sales process. So typically there's budget for the courses, there's sign up subscriptions, whatever is needed for this. There's some budget to giving you some equipment, usually some hand-me-down kind of equipment to be able to set up these labs in your home office. However, you're going to need to find the time to do this on a Saturday or Sunday, on some holidays, on some evenings, to be able to get this in. Some interesting tactical advice that a lot of people overlook is finding the time may not be as challenging as you might think if some of the self-paced training are the kinds of things that you can go through to take better advantage of some downtime that you already have to recoup that and repurpose that for professional development. What does this mean in practice? Do you commute to an office? If you commute to an office and you're commuting on mass transit, more than likely you have some time when you could actually watch this training or at least listen to this training. If you're driving to an office, there's a really good chance that you can get a lot of value from the training, even if you can't, of course, safely look at the screen. I'm not advocating that you look at a screen while you're driving, not even close. Safety is incredibly important. But as long as you're in a place where you can listen to like talk radio or a podcast, treat this professional development similar to listening to a podcast on your morning or afternoon commute. And you'd be shocked. You have a 45-minute commute twice a day, an hour and a half times 20 hours a month. You have 26 hours a month that you could potentially use to listen to this training. Let's be realistic. Of those 20 days a month, maybe 18 or 19 of them you're actually commuting. Of those 18 or 19 days, maybe traffic is a bear. 3 or 4 or 5 days it's so stressful where you really just need to concentrate on driving or have some music on that helps relax you and unplug, and you're not in a place to listen to professional development. But even extracting all of that out, probably still have 10 days a month with 90 minutes, an hour and a half. So, what is that? You still have 15 hours a month. That's commuting. Do business travel? Do you fly a lot for work? Well, there's another opportunity where you're sitting in airports. If you can download this to your phone or your tablet or have decent Wi-Fi when you're flying, that's another opportunity to power through 10, 20 hours a month of professional development. Do you go to the gym? Do you work out? Do you spend time on an elliptical or on a stationary bike or jogging? Again, not advocating looking at a screen when it's not safe to look at a screen, but if you're able to listen to a podcast, you can treat this professional development just like listening to a podcast, except instead of listening to an entertainment or professional development podcast, you're listening to training, some learning and upskilling that can help you learn more about data center network infrastructure. So again, that's another creative way. And it could be something, say you go for a walk for 30 minutes, 25, 30 days of the month around your campus, around where you live, around your neighborhood. Is that 12, 15 hours a month of time? And again, there's some days where you're not going to feel like listening to work. Be realistic. There's some days where you need your music. For my fix, it would be 80s music or 90s music. Bringing in my Gen X kind of with all of this. So there's days for sure when you won't want to listen to this, but there's also plenty of days where if you have a regular workout routine, where you have time at the gym, where you're commuting, where you're business traveling, where easily you can find 5, 10, 15 hours a month to be able to listen to this. And then the second time through, when you go back and you're looking at a guide or looking at slides, when you're actually sitting at a desk or sitting at a conference table or sitting on a sofa, whatever it is, then it's way more impactful because you've already gotten the first pass through and kind of a passive setting. So when it comes to how a data center network infrastructure sales specialist can learn and upskill, figure out specifically what you want to learn and upskill on. And I would use your buyer personas and how you prioritize your buyer personas and where they've invested their time in getting training and certification to help shape your priorities. Talk to your boss, talk to your clients, figure out what makes the most sense to do this. As long as you have a reasonably supportive employer, it's probably quite common that you'll have some budget to be able to get some subscriptions, some licenses, whatever, to sign up for these on-demand courses. Of course, if your employer is giving you a few $100s or a few $1,000 or your local currency equivalent to see this, they want to see that you're being a good steward of your company's resources and that you're actually using these resources and at some point passing these tests and getting these credentials. But they also know that these credentials not only help improve your value to your prospects and clients, it improves your career outcome. And for a sales professional that's focused on crushing your quota and improving the relationships that you have with your prospects and clients because you're able to have much better conversations now, there's a benefit to your employer and huge benefit even more. So there's certainly that part of it. And it's carving out the time. And as I was just sharing some of my favorite hacks for carving out the time between commuting, business travel, workout time at the gym, there's probably anywhere from a couple dozen to 100 hours a year or more that you could repurpose into listening to this kinds of content that would help get you probably at least half or 2/3 of the way through going through this. Sure, the second time through, you may want to be able to put yourself in a situation where you can focus a little more, going through a workbook, going through slides, watching some demos. But the first time through, you'd be shocked how much you can absorb by just kind of thinking it more like a podcast around data center network infrastructure. And just a quick plug that podcasts can be a big part of this also. You don't necessarily need to always have formal training and certification credentials, although that certainly has a place. You can learn a lot just by listening and watching podcasts. I host the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, and we've had some fantastic interviews with sales professionals and marketing professionals and C-level executives from data center network infrastructure companies and infrastructure as a service companies and data center operators. So whether it's that podcast or other similar kind of podcasts, you can learn a ton from that. You can learn a ton from attending conferences, from listening to webinars, from attending webinars, from listening to webinars on demand. There's a lot of different ways to get this knowledge, but I would encourage you to, rather than feeling like you're trying to boil the ocean, is to narrow it down, figure out who your core 2 or 3 buyer personas are, figure out what they know, how they learn, and try to mirror some of that. And that's how I would approach how a data center network infrastructure sales specialist can learn and upskill. That brings us to our final question for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. If you've enjoyed this week's show so far, make sure that you hit the like button. And if you have an idea for a topic, a challenge, a question that you'd like to see addressed in an upcoming episode, make sure to leave that in the comments on whatever platform you're watching, and we'll add that to our consideration queue for upcoming shows. So what do we got for the final question? How does a data center power management and monitoring provider generate insights to help their sales teams? How does a data center power management and monitoring provider generate insights to help their sales teams? That is a terrific question. And it's a really big area right now because of all the pressure to be better stewards of energy and grid power limitations among data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. There's more pressure than ever on companies in energy management and power management. So what can you do? And there's even a lot of pushback now to redefining that PUE, the value of how we're going to actually measure this and the metrics and the dashboards. And I've hosted some fantastic interviews around this on the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast as well around this topic. So there's a couple of different ways that I would gather these kinds of insights. For starters, when it comes to insights, get really specific about who the companies are and who the people are within the companies that care most about power management and monitoring. And to do that, let's first get clarity around your ideal client profile. At a company level, where they tend to be located geographically. That's going to make a big difference because it helps to figure out who you're taking these insights from. Because when it comes to power and energy, there for sure are issues that are more regional and less regional, depending on unique regulatory environments and how acute the grid shortage problems are, and other type of supply demand issues with data centers, critical facilities, and digital infrastructure in your area. So nail down geographic issues. Another issue that's important for customer insights as well, with where you're taking these insights from, is depending on where you're located, you may need to do this research in multiple languages. Perhaps, depending on where you're selling into, you may need customer insights coming from multiple regions of the world and be able to segment and aggregate this across not only multiple time zones, but potentially multiple languages. Second, within your ideal client profile, is how big or how small are these companies where you want to pay the most attention to? In other words, should these customer insights on data center power management and monitoring come from enterprise companies? Should they come from mid-market companies? Should they come from small and medium-sized business companies? So we need to know in your ideal client profile, what's the acceptable range for how big or how small these companies are? I tend to call it Goldilocks, right? Not too hot, not too cold, not too big, not too small. So what's the minimum size that a company tends to be to afford your minimum level of engagement, afford your minimum purchase, your minimum commitment for data center power management and monitoring? And at what point are they so large that their requirements may be so overwhelming to your current product and service capabilities, and maybe something that's on your roadmap for down the road? So be realistic about what that range is. And then are there certain industries that we want to pay more attention to than others because you're primed to do well in those industries and less primed to do well in other kinds of industries? So that's your basic ideal client profile: where they're located, company size, and industries. That will help you to drive your target account list, your account-based marketing. But when we flip over from the company, from the account level into the individual level, I think the buyer personas are where you're going to get the most actionable insights that are going to help your sales team. So this involves segmenting each one of your accounts, segmenting to figure out who the most important stakeholders are in those accounts and what they care most about, what their goals and challenges are individually, as a team, and as a company when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center power management and monitoring. What's the leading indicator that they're going to have a need for some kind of data center power management and data center power monitoring at some point, a couple of days from now, a couple of weeks from now, a couple of months from now? And how can we get in there early and often? So we need to know insights on what their biggest priorities are, how they articulate their biggest professional goals that they're trying to achieve, that likely are sitting in their job description, for sure are in their OKRs, their objectives and key results. And what are they struggling with most? What's stressing them out to no end? What do they find most challenging about areas that are at least adjacent to data center power management and monitoring? And we can't just guess about this. We can't just talk about this to your own internal stakeholders. Sure, you can gather input from your peers in sales and from your account managers and your marketers and your product managers. But when it comes to getting really useful, actionable insights, I would tell you that your internal input should be no more than 20, 25% of the puzzle. Most of the input, 75, 80% of that research, needs to come from direct external stakeholders. If you have the ability to have face-to-face conversations or video interviews, that's the best. Second best would be surveys, CRM data, looking at past conversations you've had around conversation notes and emails back and forth and chats and other kinds of data that's sitting in your CRM. At the absolute minimum, you should be able to identify 5, 10, 20 people in each of these segments and look at their LinkedIn profiles and look at what shows up when you do a search for that person, first name, last name, job title at company, what shows up on Google, what shows up on ChatGPT, what shows up wherever, because we need to get the consensus on who they are and what they care about, and specifically what their biggest professional goals are in their own words, what their biggest challenges are, what they're struggling with the most in their own words. And in their own words is the unlock to all of this. Not what we think their words are, but what their words actually are. And what their words actually are, because we've actually done the research. We've prioritized the segments within these accounts that matter most, and we're prioritizing our efforts based on who has the biggest economic impact on a deal moving forward with power management and power monitoring. And within these segments, we're taking our time, we're investing our time to gather these deep empathetic client-facing insights about what's going on in their world professionally that's directly and indirectly related to data center power management and monitoring, and we're getting the consensus on that. These are the insights that are going to help your team the most. Now, these buyer personas are not a set it and forget it kind of initiative. This isn't something where you research it once and you place it behind museum glass and it sits exactly as is for 5 or 10 years. That's the pathway to these insights becoming anywhere from less valuable to worthless over time. We know that because they change, your company changes, the marketplace changes, the industry changes, especially when it comes to power management and power monitoring. So this is the kind of research that should be repeated at the minimum once a year. And in between, there's a lot of great ways to get additional data that can help you iterate on these customer insights. As you decide that you want your client-facing team members to be seen as the be-all, end-all experts in these segments when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center power management and data center power monitoring, you're likely going to create some fantastic educational resources like downloadable planning guides, special reports and ebooks. You're also hopefully going to be hosting some very valuable educational events, either in person, like breakfast seminars, lunch and learns, symposias, conferences, as well as virtual versions, webinars, on-demand webinars, at the risk of getting really meta, live streams. And when you do this, most of the time, you're going to put a landing page with a registration form in front of being able to get access to this downloadable educational resource, or this downloadable on-demand kind of webinar or educational event. And when you're figuring out what questions you want to have on that form, what the contact properties are, what the fields are, one very, very powerful question to add in there for customer insights is simply to have a write-in field, a write-in contact property that asks that person for their biggest power management and monitoring challenge. Their biggest power management and monitoring challenge. The reason that input, even if only half of the people fill it out, is worth its weight in gold is because of what you can do with that input. For starters, now everyone on your sales team, your sales development reps or business development reps, your account executives knows when they look in the CRM for that particular prospect, they know what that particular person is struggling with the most. So your email marketing, all of your outreach, all of your conversations, you're getting X-ray vision as to what's going on in their mind when it comes to anything and everything having to do with their biggest struggle, their biggest challenge with data center power management and monitoring. So that's at an individual level. As you start to do these great educational resources and these great educational events, if you follow my best practice for asking who else should attend, who else should watch this, who else should be reading this, when it comes to data center power management and monitoring, it takes a village. It's a team effort. Typically, there's people involved from facilities, from ESG, from operations, from finance, the 4, 5, 6 roles of whatever that are most important to you. So with that in mind, who else would benefit from attending, watching, reading this? Just simply hit the forward button on your email, add a thought or two on why this matters. And we know the teams that learn together, grow together. And even if only 10 or 20% of the people that you send this email act on it, it's worth its weight in gold with getting multiple stakeholders from the same company to be consuming your educational resources and attending your educational events. And guess what? When those additional people from the same company go to download your ebook or register for your webinar or register to attend your educational event, they're also going to see the contact property that asks them biggest power management, power monitoring challenge. And a significant percentage of those are going to write that in their own words. And now when you look at the contact records from multiple stakeholders from the same company, you start to figure out, do they have consensus, or are the discrepancies on how they describe, how they articulate their biggest challenges around power management and power monitoring? And wow, is that incredibly powerful to your sales development reps and account executives to not only know in their own words with each individual team, but to know across an account how that is articulated, to know when there's 4 or 5 people on the calendar invite that are attending that meeting or attending that event, how each of them either has consensus or divergence and how they describe their biggest challenges around power management and monitoring. That input is also incredibly impactful for product managers, for a chief product officer or someone like that in your company that's working on roadmap issues, that's working with marketing on messaging issues, that's working on outbound, that's working on sales enablement, that's working on website copywriting, that's working on email marketing, social post ads, all of the above. So individually, those customer insights are incredibly valuable for sales teams. As you look at answers to those write-in questions from multiple people from the same company that you're either attending or should be attending those same meetings, that also is incredibly valuable. And then when you take the hundreds or thousands of write-in answers to that question across dozens, hundreds, thousands of different companies, you also get incredibly valuable insights on what you need to be prioritizing with your social media, with your email marketing, with your website copywriting, with your events strategy, all of the above. So that's how I would look at how a data center power management and monitoring provider can generate insights to not only help their sales team, but help their marketers, that helps their account managers, that helps their product managers, that helps their executives to align their messaging, to align all of their efforts to be way more relevant to the biggest goals and challenges that their prioritized buyer personas have, and how those goals and challenges have been articulated in their own words, both at an aggregate level, at a team level, at a company level, at an individual level. If you are paying attention to the research that shows up in your buyer personas and iteratively in all of those registration forms that are filled out in the coming weeks and in the coming months, it is incredibly impactful for anyone in a sales and a go-to-market role anywhere within data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. So that's how I would approach how a data center power management and monitoring provider can generate insights to help their sales teams. So that's the final question that we're going to have time to address in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. If you've enjoyed this week's show, make sure that you hit the like button. If you have an idea for a topic, a question, or a challenge that you think we should address in an upcoming show, feel free to leave that in the comments and we'll add that to our consideration queue. If you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming educational events and resources just like this, make sure that you're subscribed to our Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox each Sunday. You can subscribe on our website directly at www.dcsmi.com. And if you and I are not currently connected on LinkedIn, feel free to send me an invitation to connect. Make sure that you mention that you are watching the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. I get dozens of requests every week, and I try to make sure that I'm only connecting with relevant people as opposed to random people that aren't aligned with data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. So please take a moment to just add a few words in there to customize your invite. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We're all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals. And you've been watching this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. We hope you've gotten tremendous value from this, and we look forward to seeing you back again next week. Take care now.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.